The late 18th century was a time of great change and uncertainty. The United States, a young nation still finding its footing, grappled with internal divisions and external threats. It was against this backdrop of unease that the Alien and Sedition Acts were passed in 1798. These four laws, enacted during the presidency of John Adams, were aimed at curtailing dissent and increasing national security. The most enduring and controversial of these acts has been the Alien Enemies Act, a law that has cast a long shadow on the nation's history. The Alien Enemies Act, in essence, granted the president sweeping powers to detain and deport non-citizens deemed dangerous to the United States during times of war. The law, enacted amidst a naval conflict with France known as the Quasi-War, was largely aimed at French immigrants who were suspected of harboring sympathies for their former homeland. However, the Act's broad language left it open to interpretation, paving the way for its use against a variety of groups throughout the nation's history. The Act's passage was met with immediate controversy, with critics denouncing it as a blatant attack on civil liberties. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, future presidents themselves, penned scathing critiques of the law, arguing that it violated the principles of due process and freedom of speech. Despite these protests, the Act remained on the books, a stark reminder of the precariousness of liberty in times of perceived crisis. The Quasi-War, an undeclared naval conflict between the United States and France from 1798 to 1800, provided the immediate context for the Alien Enemies Act. Tensions between the two nations had been simmering since the Jay Treaty of 1794, which France viewed as favoring Britain. These tensions escalated into open hostility when American diplomats were met with demands for bribes from French officials in what became known as the XYZ Affair. The XYZ Affair sparked outrage in the United States, fueling anti-French sentiment and calls for war. The Federalist Party, led by Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, capitalized on this wave of nationalistic fervor to consolidate their power and silence their political opponents, the Democratic Republicans. The Alien and Sedition Acts were born out of this political climate, a tool to suppress dissent and consolidate federal authority. While the Alien Enemies Act was never used to deport any French nationals during the Quasi-War, it created a climate of fear and suspicion within immigrant communities. French immigrants, already viewed with suspicion by some, faced increased scrutiny and harassment. The Act's vague language, which left the definition of an alien enemy largely up to the government's discretion, sowed the seeds of fear and distrust that would have lasting repercussions. The Alien Enemies Act, though initially enacted in response to a specific historical context, would cast a long shadow on American history, resurfacing in times of war and national anxiety. During World War I, the Act was invoked to justify the detention of German immigrants suspected of disloyalty to the United States. These detentions, often carried out without due process or legal representation, highlighted the Act's potential for abuse and its disproportionate impact on minority groups. With the outbreak of World War II, the Alien Enemies Act was once again wielded as a tool of national security, this time on a far larger scale. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which authorized the mass internment of Japanese Americans living on the West Coast. Though the order itself did not explicitly cite the Alien Enemies Act, it drew upon the same logic of wartime expediency and the perceived threat of enemy aliens. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans, the majority of whom were U.S. citizens, were forcibly relocated from their homes and businesses to internment camps scattered across the country. These camps, characterized by harsh conditions and limited freedom of movement, stood as a stark symbol of the government's willingness to sacrifice civil liberties in the name of national security. The Alien Enemies Act, though largely dormant for much of the 20th century, has re-emerged in the 21st century as a point of contention in debates over immigration, national security, and civil liberties. The attacks of September 11, 2001, and the subsequent war on terror ushered in a new era of heightened security measures and government surveillance. The Patriot Act, passed in the wake of 9/11, expanded the government's powers to detain and deport non-citizens suspected of terrorism, echoing the logic of the Alien Enemies Act. The Trump administration's travel ban, which sought to restrict travel from several Muslim-majority countries, drew comparisons to the discriminatory policies of the past. Critics argued that the ban, which was widely seen as targeting Muslims based on their religion, was a violation of the First Amendment's guarantee of religious freedom and a dangerous precedent reminiscent of the Alien Enemies Act. The Alien Enemies Act, though a relic of a bygone era, serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of civil liberties, particularly in times of crisis. Its legacy continues to shape debates about national security, immigration, and the balance between freedom and security in a post-9/11 world. The Act's history stands as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked executive power and the importance of safeguarding the rights of all individuals regardless of their citizenship status.